Welcome to Pencils and Lipstick. This is a podcast for indie authors. I'm Kat Caldwell, novelist, short story writer, and book coach. Here on Pencils and Lipstick, we're obsessed with all things story, and it is my goal to bring you the writing tips that you need to make your novel come to life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Pencils and Lipstick. This is episode 261 of the podcast. I'm Kat Caldwell, and today I have an interview with Lynn Bohart. You might remember her if you're a longtime listener. We have talked about her mysteries before, but today we are going to talk about how she has switched gears into YA and YA mysteries and the difference between writing for adults and writing for kids, why she switched genres, and if she has given up writing for adults altogether. Hint, she has not. So we are going to have that interview for you in just a moment. It is the end of March, if you can believe it. And my life personally has been rather busy this first quarter of 2024. I have managed to finish Across the English Channel, which is what we are calling my next historical romance. We finally have a title for it. So I'm really excited. It is at the editor's, Stacy Juba. She has it in her hands. And I am looking at a May, probably end of May release for that. Still working out the details of it. I get to do the fun part of finding a cover, writing the next novella that will go between that one and Across the Thames. So I'm going to write Claire's story next. I'm pretty excited about that one. So I just got back from the Future of Publishing conference last week, and there's a lot going on in the writing world right now. There's a lot of different ways that writers are looking at their careers. It's very interesting times. There's a lot of AI going on. A lot more people have accepted the fact that AI is here and it's not going anywhere. There are more options for audio and there are more options for translations. I don't know, guys. There's a lot of options. And while we might be, I guess, reluctant to adapt to AI because you're thinking more about the people, the translators who might lose their jobs or the audiobook readers who might lose their jobs. I think really what's going to happen is it's going to shift a little. If you don't know, in translation, AI has been being used for 25, 30 years. I used to work in translation. Believe me, we checked and double checked against AI all the time. Translation is a really meticulous job. And the more we could use the computer to help us, the more we used it. I mean, that's just how it is. There are still people who do line by line translations, but I think they will be few and far between. It's a hard job to do. It's a very costly job to do as well. If you're paying for somebody spoke about it, and she paid $3,000 to $4,000 a book to get them translated, and fair enough, because somebody is reading it in one language, translating it into another, but that is more than what most people pay for editing. So it's pretty cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So there is more of an embrace, I think, for AI because of the cost. It really brings down cost. Again, you got to figure out what works for you. But I am going to have a couple people come in and talk to us about their companies and how their companies are serving writers. Not all of them are using AI, but there's a couple of companies that help you put together the book and the book launch, which is interesting. I know for a couple of you out there who are not really wanting to do all this stuff after the book, and that's fine, especially if you have one or maybe two books in you and you don't really want to deal with the dashboard and KDP and doing all that. Yeah, that's fine. Everyone can run their business or their book however they want. And so we'll be having a couple more interviews coming up. We're also going to be talking about book blurbs pretty soon. But we take a break for July and August, so we only have 3 more months of the podcast for for this 6 years. So that's amazing. I am going to put together a few more thoughts about the conference, and I will be talking to you guys about that next week. Just things, life is moving at lightning speed. And I want to get into Lynn's interview because I think it's pretty interesting. This is a pretty standard author interview. We're going to be talking about her books and YA writing. If you are new to the podcast, this is how it goes. Sometimes we have interviews, and sometimes it's just me talking to you about things that I've seen or done or heard about. Sometimes we talk about craft and what we need to do for our writing, right? How we get that book out there and finished, honestly, finished before it gets out there. That's a big deal. So if you are new, liking and subscribing helps the podcast. This is all free for you. You can follow me on lessonsandstory.substack.com. You guys can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I'm not super active because I am a proponent of writing more than social media, but you can contact me there. And if you guys have questions or want somebody on the show, you can go to catcaldwell.com, go to the contact form, and tell me, who do you want here? All those emails go directly to my inbox. If you are selling me YouTube videos, I don't. I'm probably not going to answer you. But if you talk to me about writing, I will answer you. So if you guys have been listening for a while, it's still nice if maybe you give a review or share the podcast. That really helps. All the things. If you guys want to read my short stories, one way that you can monetarily support me, since this is free and my newsletter is free, is you can support me on lessonsandstory.substack.com. If you support that Substack monetarily, you actually get access to the critiques that I receive on my short stories. Some of them are painful. Some of them I got a critique. This one will go out today. If you support me there, you can read the critique. He tells me exactly what I tell people, and it's so funny how you can't see it for yourself. I'm also usually like running behind on my short stories and have to get them in, but he's giving me a critique that I was like, oh my gosh, when I read it, it's like, yes, I actually tell writers this. And here I am doing it myself. So this is why we need we need feedback on our stories. So but yeah, sharing the podcast also really helps the podcast and supports me as well. And just giving a review, giving some new reviews out there to show people that we're still relevant. So without further ado, no more. We're going to talk to Lynn. Lynn is a mystery writer. She's done a lot of things in her life. For her adult book, she's created these wacky women that remind me of like the Golden Girls, but they solve mysteries, right? But she has come out with a YA novel that is also mystery, set in 1965. So we're going to talk a lot about that. So let's get into the interview. There we go. Hello, Lynn. It's so nice to see you again.
It's good to see you too, Kat.
So today you're doing lots of things all the time, but I want to talk to you about your latest book raid bestseller. I see your little sticker here. And it's The Unstoppables: Case of the Missing Will. I'm thinking this is going to be a series. Is that
It
true?
is going to be a series.
Okay, it
I'm
sounds
about
like it.
halfway through the second book.
So this is for YA, but you aren't normally a YA writer.
Right. I have spent my writing career writing paranormal mysteries for adults. I have a detective series and sort of a next generation cozy mystery series. That's my most popular series. And then this is kind of a spin-off from that.
Okay.
So okay, so just let me tell you about.
Yeah, like is it their grandkids? Is it
Well,
their
because I keep getting asked, so why did you write this book? I mean, why did you switch suddenly to YA? The Old Maids of Mercer Island
Okay.
is the next gen cozy mystery. So there's 6 books in that series, and the protagonist is Julia Applegate. She's funny. She's accident prone. They're very serious mysteries, sex trafficking.
Yeah.
A lot of really sort of heavy duty mysteries, but lighthearted in its presentation. And in fact, I think it's behind me, The Key to Murder, the poster behind me is the 5th book. And
Okay.
in that book, I killed off a childhood friend of Julia.
Gosh.
I know, I'm so mean. He shows up on her doorstep in the first page and dies. And her brother, who's sort of this globe-trotting forensic anthropologist, is a little bit like an Indiana Jones. She's in her 60s, so he's 3 years older than her. Um, Comes home because he and Carter, the gentleman who died, were best friends growing
Oh,
up. And Carter was a professor at the University of Washington. So my books are set here in the Seattle area. And so writing that, I was able to sort of explore a little bit about uh, her and Ben. Ben is her brother, their relationship when they were
okay.
kids with Carter. In the last book that I just wrote, No Place Home Like Home for a Murder, uh, Ben now has bought Carter's home. He's staying in the Seattle area for a while, and he shows up at Julia's house with a box from Carter's house saying, "Hey, look, Carter was writing a short story, and it's called Case of the Missing Will, and it was based on a case that they solved when they were kids." And he
Oh,
jokes
cool.
with Julia saying, "You ought to finish it." And she says, "Yeah, right. Well, I'm first I've got to solve the case of the dead body in Rudy's kitchen, which is one of her best friends."
Jeez. I love
So
I love how you come up with these things. There's always someone dying in someone's
yes,
house.
oh yeah, they die everywhere. But I thought at the time, well, why not go ahead and write that short story?
Okay.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Oh,
And
it was gonna be a short story.
yeah, I
Okay.
thought it was gonna, or maybe at the most, like a novella or something. And I just got totally into it. And so it's set in 1965 because Old Maids of Mercer Island are basically four older women that keep getting involved in, I mean, murders just keep dropping into their laps. And they're just forced to solve them because nobody can solve them as good as they can. And so now I've created this younger version of Julia. She's
Oh,
13.
okay.
Her brother Ben is 16, and he's genius level. And I had to
Hmm.
already establish that in the adult books that he was, uh, is it Mensa? Mensa, I think is the organization for geniuses. Anyway, and arrogant about it.
Of
He's
course.
yeah. So they have this really cute relationship with each other, and so I was able to like really capitalize on that as kids.
Okay.
In 1965, I'm old enough that that's when I was in high school. So all of your listeners can figure out how old I am now. But it was so much fun to go back to 1965. The culture was different,
Yep.
no cell phones,
Right.
internet, no DNA, no,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I really had to sit down and say, okay, first of all, what's the
The
mystery
story.
with
Where's
the
the mill
crime?
the will?
Yeah, what's the deal with the will? And then how are these kids gonna solve it? And
Right.
I ended up, I literally was thinking of the movie Home Alone.
Okay.
And I mean, that's an old movie, but I don't know if you've seen it, but it's where a kid, is left at home for Christmas by mistake by his parents. And these two guys are going to break in to rob him, and he booby traps the house. And it's a
Right. That's
comedy,
right.
right?
Yeah, and it was like the 80s, right? So there was no
Yeah,
cell phone,
yeah.
so yeah.
So so here's a picture of the book. So the house on the front of this book is Old Man Pendleton's house that he lives in, built pre-Civil War. It's got secret tunnels and passages in it
Oh, cool.
because I wanted to create that kind of Home Alone scene
Mhm.
where these kids outsmart the bad guys.
Nice.
And it's funny, hot, fast paced and scary, but funny. And then I had Julia, Ben, and Carter. See, Carter's alive,
He's
Ben,
still alive
right?
at that point.
And they recruit some other misfit kids. And so then it became kind of the kids from Stranger Things meet Home Alone,
Oh, that's so
you
fun.
know? So it is a funny romp, really,
Yeah.
of these kind of fearless kids. And I had always developed Julia as an adult, as somebody who she couldn't step back from an injustice, right?
Mm-hmm.
She always feels that she's got to right the wrong. And so the tagline for this book as a 13-year-old is that they break every rule in the book because wrong can't win.
Oh, I like
And
that. Yeah.
that's her, and they do break every rule in the book. I had a friend of mine who is a retired cop read it, and I said, okay, so how much of this can I really get away with? Because I mean, they're breaking laws, and they literally dig up a grave in the middle of the night. And he laughed, he read it, and he loved it. And he said, yeah, they probably they're breaking laws, but back in 1965, would the police, kind of turn
Have
a blind
arrested a
eye,
kid.
and they
Yeah.
ended up having to do a community service. I mean, they were too young. Nobody could have gone to jail anyway.
Mm,
But so it was just fun.
that is fun.
And again, because all my books are paranormal, they all have helpful ghosts in them. In the adult books, Julia's mother is dead and calls her on her cell phone. Her
Oh my
mother
goodness.
is just this snarky woman who she's just wonderful. Well, now she's alive, obviously. So
That's
the fans of
right.
the old maids books have really enjoyed it because they're able to go back in time
Right.
and meet Carter and, Julia's mom as real people,
Yeah.
because they'd only known them,
As
in the
ghosts.
adult books as ghosts. So yeah, it's just fun.
That is fun. I mean, I've been thinking about these books that are set now in the 80s. I've read a couple, the 80s, the 90s, and you think, you know what? It is actually easier to set books back then because these days there's really no excuse for any miscommunication. There's no
Well,
excuse
that's true.
for not knowing where anyone is. Like all the
Yeah,
young people have these tracking apps that they're
right,
tracking their friends on. So it's kind of like, oh, I mean, you have to go back, you have to make sure that the history is right and like the time is right?
right,
You can't input like color television when hardly
right.
anyone has, so but at the same time, did you find that fun to sort of realize they don't have this technology and you can sort of,
It's all simpler.
yeah,
I mean, they're not searching social media
yeah,
to learn about anybody. It's more based on their own tracking skills in a way, and
mhm,
observational skills, and their fortitude. These are
right,
kids, and yet they put themselves in real jeopardy. Um, uh, but things like finding a letter, Julia even describes herself as a snoop. She not only overhears a conversation right in the beginning about Mr. Pendleton's death, that kind of piques her interest. But then she sees somebody hand off a letter or an envelope to somebody else that piques her interest.
mhm,
And then she finds that envelope with a note in it.
right,
Don't say anything, and, everything will be fine, that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of things. And she's a Nancy Drew reader,
right. Oh,
so
I
she's a
loved
mystery
Nancy.
reader.
Great.
And so she, even though Ben's the genius, right, and wants to take charge, she's the conniver. She's the
Right.
um so and I just had so much fun developing these relationships. And I brought I brought race relations into it because,
I mean,
again,
it's
back then,
1965.
this is set in Wisconsin. I grew up
Okay.
in California, Southern California, but I remember there wasn't a lot of black kids in our
Mhm.
school. I befriended a couple of black kids, and I remember other kids staring at me for that. Her best friend in the adult books is an African American woman. Her
Mhm.
best friend in this book is a young African American girl, Keisha, and her brother, who's the same age as Ben, is on the football team. So
Sure.
so it's like anything, especially in mysteries, you have to develop characters that have resources,
Yeah.
come with resources, whether it's intellectual, physical, material, whatever, because they have to be able to bring those to the table. And so obviously, this group of misfit kids all bring something. And And I purposely I worked with, because one of the kids, one of the big football players that they recruit, um, is slow
Mm-hmm.
and has been bullied.
Mm-hmm.
And as he becomes part of this team, a couple of times he comes up with the idea, and
Right.
everybody's like, yeah, yeah, that's good,
Right.
and encourage him. There is a kid that stutters badly and is a diabetic. I remember when I was young, a friend of mine was diagnosed with diabetes, and we all thought she was going to die.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
didn't know anybody with diabetes back then. It was, and everybody looked at her weird. Everybody was like, gosh, she has diabetes.
Right.
So I try to deal with some of that. The Julia's mother's sister, Aunt Ruth, lives with them because she had an abusive husband,
Mm.
and gets a restraining order against him, and leaves and comes to live with them. She becomes a key character in this book. But again, that's the kind of thing nobody talked about when I was a kid.
Right. There were lots of secrets back
Oh yeah,
then all
you
the
didn't
time.
talk about other people's marriages and what was going on with them. It was all pushed under the rug. So
Yeah.
that was some of what I, enjoyed doing, was exploring that, and trying to make it authentic to the
Right.
time, to how these kids dealt with that, and how, because Julia even asks her aunt, why are you helping us? And she just finally says, because I'm tired of bullies.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause that's, her husband was a bully. The guy who's the killer in this is a bully. She said, I'm tired of them getting away with it. She's just had it.
Right, right.
No.
That's so fun to see that, you said that your main character can't stand injustice, and growing up in that time, I can see how that would be so formative to her, right? Like seeing
Mhm.
America really actually change. Like it took 100 years for things
Yeah.
to actually really change and start going in the better direction. That would be very formative for a 13-year-old to be seeing
Yes.
the world change, but also being living probably in a smaller town in Wisconsin, because it's Wisconsin. I grew up there. There isn't much there,
Yeah.
But kids were also outside all the time.
All the time.
You
Oh
could
yeah.
get into so much mischief.
Yeah.
I mean,
On their
there's
bikes.
so many things my mom doesn't
Yeah.
know we did in those
Well,
80s.
I use that, in that they keep going over to Mr. Pendleton's house at night, because they're looking for the will. They're trying to
Mhm.
find it, because they know that the grandson is looking for it. And but they can't tell their parents they're going over there. So they're always making up stories that we're going to Carter's house, or we're going to Rosemary's house, and they're always on their bikes. Stranger
Right.
Things,
Yeah.
always on their bikes. Somebody who read it said, "No, really, would kids really do this? They're taking an awful lot of risks." And I said, "Look at Stranger Things. Those kids in that book, or in that movie, the show, were constantly putting themselves
Yeah.
in danger,
Yeah. We
and
would
they
enter
didn't know what they
abandoned
were doing."
houses.
Yeah,
We like, and that was 50, 20, 15 years later. So yes, kids would do that.
yeah,
Now, they don't do it now. It would be hard to have that book now, because you're trying to convince society that kids are putting their phones down in order
right.
to, and parents, if they hear a noise, they can track. There was, track their kid. There, I guess there was a lot more trust in that things were going to be fine. I don't know. There
Or
wasn't this anxiety
ignorance.
or
Yeah,
ignorance, but
yeah.
we would cross rivers, and
Oh yeah,
like
yeah,
come home before the lights turn
yeah.
on, the porch light turns on. That was
Yeah.
the rule.
No, I remember, I mean, this really dates me, but I remember walking to a couple miles to grammar school by myself.
Right. I crossed the
I
highway to get to
I would
school.
never, ever have let my daughter. In fact, my daughter complained to me that I was just hovering over her and not giving her enough freedom. And I said, you know what? It only has to happen to you once, that you get, picked up by somebody or whatever, and you're gone. And
And I'm
I
not
will
willing
never
to
ever
do.
forgive myself.
Well, yeah, there
Back
are more
then, parents,
people, more drivers, more
yeah.
news. We know more,
Well, that's the reality, is it probably was happening back then,
Mm.
but we didn't have 24-hour news.
Yes, exactly. To scare us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
So
so
it
true.
was a different time, and obviously I'm hopeful that my old maids fans will love it, but then I will, develop a new younger audience,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll enjoy it because it is different than today.
Yeah.
These kids are relying on their wits,
Mm-hmm.
rather than going and just searching social media or the internet to
Right.
get the information they want. They have to figure it out themselves.
Right.
And so it's different. It's really different, that and that is the time that I grew up in.
So how do you what would you say is the biggest difference between writing for adults and writing for kids? I mean, yes, you have to have like the protagonist is that age and try to
Mhm.
have them act that age, I guess. But what else is there different about? Because they're both mysteries, right? So
Mhm.
are there big differences between those two
Yeah,
genres?
because you have to be careful when you're writing to that audience.
Okay.
Obviously, there's, even though the crime is serious, the crime happens off stage. There's actually two
Okay.
murders, and they both happen off stage. I didn't want to murder somebody right, on the page in front of a young audience. There's no blood and guts.
Mm.
But they do dig up a grave, kind of a gruesome thing at night. So, a lot of it was me finding that balance of
Mm-hmm.
what I thought younger readers would find intriguing and go, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to read that.
Yeah.
And what would be, wait a minute,
Way
that's
too much.
that's crossing the line. And
Okay.
I read, a lot of adults read young
Mm-hmm.
adult books,
Mm-hmm.
and um, they're pretty authentic, the mysteries are anyway. And so, I was just careful
Yeah.
and you have to be careful with the language,
Okay.
obviously. But I did research because back then, it was bitchin' and
Yeah.
awesome, and there's those kinds of
Yeah.
phrases. But they didn't swear. They're not, foul mouthed or anything like that,
Yeah.
even
They get their mouths cleaned
washed
out
out
with
with
soap.
soap. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
happened to me once. It's terrible. I
Yeah.
still remember. Uh, what about like just sentence, like sentence structure wise or paragraph or like chapters? Are they shorter? Are they different
I
at all that way?
Yeah, I did it's a shorter book, first of all.
Okay.
So my adult mysteries are 92,000. This is around 70,000, and I did that purposely because it's a young adult
Okay.
book. And it is shorter paragraphs, and
Okay.
it's a little bit faster paced.
Faster paced.
So and so even though I do use imagery and descriptive language, um, I probably minimize that compared to what I might do in, stuck more with action,
Okay.
as much as I could. So,
And
and,
did you see that because you were reading YA mysteries or did you?
one of the things I read about young adult books is that they, I don't know that this is really teachers and stuff, but they want to see the protagonist grow. They
Mm,
want the protagonist and or other characters to sort of grow throughout the process and learn something. And so I did try to do that as well. And part of it was the bonding of this group of kids
mm,
that come together to do something that's really important to them. The guy who dies was the shop teacher at school. So the older boys knew him. He was the shop teacher at the high school and the junior high. Back then it was junior high, not middle school. And so they all want to get justice for him
okay.
because they cared about him.
Right.
So yeah, so there's a lot of those kinds of themes throughout the book as well.
Right. Right. They're coming together. That's very cool. So you said that your people who read the Old Maids of Mercer, they've enjoyed these books.
Yeah.
Were
Well,
they surprised?
yeah, and I think it's because they, obviously they're probably reading it wondering, okay, did she nail Julia as a kid, but what I've heard a couple of them say is that they've now kind of seen the backstory in
Yeah.
real time
Yeah.
about Julia, which has been fun for them because she's a very strong character in the adult books. I mean, my fans love her because she's fearless, but she's also really funny and she's
Yeah.
snarky. I wrote those books. I probably told you this before. Because I was writing my detective series, and then I read a couple of Janet Ivanovich's books, and she's
Mm-hmm.
very snarky and
Mm-hmm.
humorous. And I thought I could do that. I
Yeah.
could do that. And so I wrote the first Old Maids of Mercer Island, and then people loved it, and so then I just stayed with it. So my problem now is people are waiting for the next Old Maids to come out, and I want to get
And
the second Unstoppables out, so that that people recognize that it's a series.
so how long was it, just as like time consuming to write the YA as it is to write an Old Maids of
No,
Mercer?
sure. It was a little shorter, partly because the
A
book
little.
is shorter.
Okay.
But I work through a writers group, my writers group, and no matter what, it takes me, probably 10 months, because we meet
Yeah.
every 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and they're only reviewing a couple chapters every 2 weeks. So it takes me 10 months to get the book through them anyway. So it's a good year usually before I
Yeah.
get a book.
Well, you got to figure out the mystery. Like, do you know the mystery? Like, do you know all the parts about the mystery before you start writing?
I know the beginning and the end. I know where I want the especially the protagonist to end up. I know what the climax is going to be, and I know what the concept of the mystery is. If
Okay.
if it's a murder, it's always a murder. But yeah,
If somebody dropped dead weight,
it's
everyone
always got to be somebody's got to die. But why did they die? What
Okay.
was what prompted the murder? What was somebody trying to cover up or protect or whatever? And but what I don't do is I don't plot the clues. I'm a pantser,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't write an outline in advance. I know the basics of my story, and then I start writing, and a lot of it comes to me as I write.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of times when I've known who the bad guy was going to be, and I changed it by the end because I've developed a character that I go, oh my God, he is awful. He's a much better bad guy. I'm making, and then
Okay.
then I have to kind of go back and look, can I adjust things to make him the bad guy? And if I can, then I've changed, because I think
Right.
it's a more powerful story that way.
Right. Right. So you
Um,
allow yourself to have that space to figure it out. Have you ever found yourself in a corner where you're like, I don't know how, like it's takes
Well,
you
I did with the first Old Maids book, because I started with the concept of let's write like Janet Ivanovich, right? And
yeah.
I came up with a first chapter of one of the old maids drops dead in her peach cobbler at a Christmas luncheon in front of everybody. And I thought, ha ha ha, how funny. And I wrote this scene, and all my writers group and everybody loved it. And then I wrote a couple more chapters, and then it was like, okay, what's the mystery? What's
Yeah.
the crime? I was stuck on that book for a couple of years until I happened to watch a documentary on sex trafficking, and how sex trafficking used motels across the country to house the women.
Oh,
And anyway, and I went, ah, I like that.
now
So
I can
instead
do it.
of motels, I used women's homeless shelters,
Right.
and boom, as soon as I got that, I was back to writing.
Yeah. That's cool.
So, I told you I'm making a presentation at a summit coming up, and it's based on taking a great idea to a great story, and it's answering basically 18 questions. It's not doing an outline, because I just
Yeah.
don't do that, but it's knowing basic information before you start writing, so you don't get stuck.
Right.
and
Right.
and then and then doesn't mean you can't change, but at least you have a roadmap, and then you can. And so I think pantsers can deal with that.
Yeah. There is a lot more, whether you're an outliner. I mean, I would assume outliners spend a lot of time thinking about their outline. I mean, I always tell my clients, like, you're going to have to sit back and think about your book a lot, or that's why a lot of people get coaches, because the coach will,
Yes.
how it
I
works, like
sat
they
in
ask
on
you a question and then you have to think about it.
I
You're like,
sat in on a John Grisham masterclass once, and he
oh,
apparently he takes weeks to outline his books to the nth degree.
wow.
I would never write it then.
Yeah.
See, if I had made all those decisions scene by scene by scene, then I'd be like, okay, I'm done.
I feel like that's a very man thing to do.
Yeah. Or OCD maybe.
OCD.
But
I mean, but it's complicated, right? So I guess if he's going into law and like he has all this, I mean, I don't enjoy his books. My husband does because it's just like so much like skip,
yeah,
skip, get back to the action.
yeah.
But I guess
Yeah,
he
maybe
has
that type is
fans.
different, but also maybe that's just how he
Yeah, it's just his
functions best.
process,
And
right?
he said it doesn't mean he can't change and tweak things as he goes, but
It just seems like
I
wasted time to
love,
me.
I love the creative process.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love just exploring and discovering,
Mm-hmm.
and it, which is weird in mysteries because you do have to plot, you have to have clues hidden. You're hiding the killer. Typically in this book, you know who the killer is, but um so you, but somehow those come to me. I don't,
Okay.
I've never just sat down and go, okay, I'm going to have this letter that they find. As I was writing this book, I had her overhear this conversation. I had her as she fell flat on her face in the kitchen and she saw the bad guy hand an envelope to an attorney. That just popped into my head. It's like, okay, that's perfect. And then boom, okay, she finds the envelope later in the trash can and she's a snoop and she picks
She's
it up
listening.
and she reads it.
There was no
So
social media, people. We had to entertain ourselves with something. She's a
that's how I
13-year-old. What
function,
else is she going to do? There's
Yeah,
also no television, not
no,
really. So you got to
no,
entertain yourself.
no, and it's the kind of shows. In fact, I have that in the show where she and her brother are always conniving, and her mother says, "God, come on and watch the, Andy Griffith show with us, with your dad and I, because that's the kind of thing that
Right.
they would have done as a family back there is sit around and watch these,
Yeah.
these TV shows. So
So cute. I love that. So you are going to be working on this book, on this next book. This
yes, the next book is Case of the Deadly Secret. This is the
Ooh.
other thing. This is kind of an homage to Nancy Drew mysteries, which I read growing up, which was always the case of the broken clock or
Mhm.
case of the whatever. So I have three novels in mind, and the second one is Case of the Deadly Secret. And so the Unstoppables, which is this group of kids, will come together again to actually save somebody's life and to divulge the deadly secret of the bad
Are
guy.
you going to have them get older? Or are they going to like stay the same
No.
age like the Hardy Boys?
Yeah, no, because I'm gonna have these in pretty quick succession.
Okay.
Because I have three books in mind, and then I kind of feel like I got to get back to the old
Mm-hmm.
dates, and we'll see how well this series does. If it takes off, then I
Then
probably
you'll
can,
go back to it.
yeah,
Yeah, I think this is really a great example of when it's almost your creative brain almost sometimes needs a break. Like you've written six Old Maids of Mercer, right? Like Island. That's a lot. That's a lot
yeah,
of thinking
yeah,
and a lot of developing. And then it's like a little breath of fresh air, doing something different, but kind of related. And um, it's like we shouldn't deny ourselves those little
yeah.
breaks, right?
Well, and I've told many people this that um I miss my characters. I miss the old maids right now. I mean, I'm going to finish this second book and then I might go back and do another old maids and then come back and
And
do
then
the
come back.
third Unstoppables because I miss them. And there's
Yeah.
this part of me, they become so real to me. I think, well, what are they doing
They got to be
while I'm
doing
not
something.
there? What kind of trouble are they getting into? And I don't know about it.
Probably a lot.
Yeah.
Knowing your characters, they're
Yeah.
probably getting a lot. That's amazing. Well, I think anyone who is thinking about writing mystery or is writing mystery should definitely get on your newsletter because you're always
Yes.
interviewing like
Yes. Oh my God.
detectives and retired like super interesting people who can help because I would assume you can't do mystery all by yourself in your office. Like there is quite a bit
Oh.
of
I do a
investigation you
lot of
got to do.
research. I
Yeah.
interview people when in one of my books, when they found a skeleton at the bottom of an old well. I cast about to find somebody who was part of search and rescue and interviewed him about how would they bring that body up, that.
Mm.
So yeah, so Let's Talk About Murder is the name of my newsletter. And my next interview, which is coming out this Saturday, which is probably, way past when this podcast will air, but is he calls himself a man tracker. It's a guy named Shane Patterson who does tracking. I came upon this organization called NecroSearch. They go out and find clandestine graves of people that have been murdered. And, it's cold cases. The law enforcement has never been able to solve it. And the parents have, or the loved ones have never known what's happened to their
Oh,
loved
that's so
ones.
sad.
And he's their only tracker. So it's an interesting interview
Yeah.
about how he does that.
Wow.
Yeah, and he volunteers. These are all volunteers, these people that do this. It's so
Wow. Yeah, and it's so great that you go out and find these people because, it would be hard to know that even exists if
I
you
didn't.
weren't. That's
Yeah,
so
I
crazy.
come upon these things. The last guy that interviewed started something called the Murder Accountability Project. It's the only organization in the United States that tracks murders and serial killers. So law enforcement could go look at their data to say, okay, if these things about this murder, is this similar to things that have happened in other parts of the country? Are we looking at somebody, who's moving around as a serial killer? And he started that on his own. So yeah, I met
Wow.
some really interesting
Yeah,
people.
your newsletters are also always fascinating. It makes me wish I could figure out how to write mysteries. It's like very fascinating. I will send people over to Lynn Bohart author.com. The link will be
Right.
in the show notes. You have your books listed on your website as
Amazon.
well.
Yeah, on
Are
Amazon,
they
right.
published everywhere?
I
Are
am
they
only I'm only an
only on
Amazon
Amazon?
author
Only
at
on
this point.
Amazon.
Yeah.
All right, but they can get the ebook, the
Yep. Yep.
paperback, all those
Paperback.
things.
Mhm.
And so the case of the missing will, the Unstoppables, that's pretty much for preteens, teens, and
Yeah.
above, right? Like pretty much
And
anyone
adults.
can read it.
Right. Right.
All right.
Absolutely.
So just so that everyone knows, and it won the book grade bestseller for teen and
Yep.
adult books. So that's very cool. Congrats for that. That is so much fun. Thank you so much, Lynn, for coming on and talking to us about
I appreciate
switching
it.
genres.
It's always fun to talk to you anyway. So I
I
really
know we use this as an excuse to catch up. It was
okay,
very
I'll write
cool.
another book really
Yes,
quickly so I can come back.
exactly.